Hi, everyone. This is Sam Silverman, Managing Partner of EB-5AN. Thank you for taking time to join us on today's webinar. Today, we're going to be speaking with two real EB5 investors, Kaushal and Ayushi from India, who recently joined our Twin Lakes, Georgia rural EB5 project. So thank you very much for taking time to join us for today's interview and discussion. Please introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background and experience and kind of what led you to explore EB5 as an option to stay in the US long term.
Sure. This is Kaushal, originally from India, Mumbai, and came here to United States for master's degree. And over to you, Ayushi.
Yeah, I'm Ayushi, originally from Mumbai as well. Both of us actually came to the US to pursue our master's in engineering. It was a great experience to actually explore the workforce here. And that's how we got introduced to the whole visa world within the US as well.
Mm-hmm.
We actually started off on student visas. Both of us went the route of working through the OPT and CPT programs, and then eventually transitioned on to our H-1Bs.
Right.
And I think we started thinking about EB5 because I think most people know the backlog for India is extremely long. We actually have our green cards applied through our workplace as well, but we knew the backlog would be really long, and while we wait for it, the choices are very limited, and we are very limited by the options we have, whether it's to start our own business or explore different kinds of opportunities. That's what led us to EB5 in the first place.
Yeah, makes sense. And then while you're on student visa, you're just focused on getting a job. And then once you get into job, you come across, okay, I need to get on H-1B and then the line of green card, either through EB2 or EB3 strategy. Now, besides that, no one talks about or no one knows about what other options are open. There are options like EB1 or EB2, NIW, or even EB5. So personally, I even looked into EB1 to qualify for that kind of profile by, I would say, qualifying 5 of those 10 pointers, right? Being the judge in one of the competitions or publishing a research paper and whatnot. But it's very subjective to the government or the USCIS discretion to approve or not approve that green card process. And through EB2, as Ayushi mentioned, the waiting period is for almost more than a decade and a half or so. And with the ever-changing policies, it might come to 5 years, it might go to 50 years. So we didn't want to be in a position where we are not able to either move out of the country or see our family. A lot of our peers or friends face similar situations in COVID timeline where they couldn't even see their parents in critical conditions because of the lack of PR or just them being on H-1B visas. So that was one of our pain points. And moving on, learning about EB5 was more of an exploratory process. One of our friends or family relatives, I would say, suggested to look into that option, but it's always seemed like far-fetched, something I would say difficult to execute as well as achieve. And more than that, when you don't have a lot of information freely available, it's very difficult to get that belief or confidence in the process itself because it's a little bit out of norm. So the lack of information, I would say fear of unknown, was definitely stopping us from jumping into it with wholeheartedly or with 100% direction.
Got it. So when looking back, now that your I-526C has been filed and your advanced parole and EAD have been approved, giving you that flexibility today, but looking back, when did you kind of first, really seriously start exploring EB5 and think, oh, maybe this is going to be the right path for us to stay long term?
Yeah, makes sense. I guess we came in United States in 2017. I'll start with that. And we got our H-1B. For me, it was in 2021, and for Ayushi, it was 2020.
Okay.
So after that, when we came across to the H-1B realities, paths to citizenship were long. We seriously gave a thought maybe from the beginning of 2022, and September 2022 was, I would say, a good timeline to think about, to look into this particular program seriously, learn about it,
Yep.
and get more information as we take steps. One, I would say, move ahead in that direction, one step at a time.
Yeah, and also we didn't know how beautifully laid out the program truly is. It's very organized. It's not initially when the first time you hear about it, it's like, how will I find a project? Do I need to buy a house? Do I need to buy a factory? But there is actually a method to the madness, which definitely helps. Also, when we learned about concurrent filing, if you're in the US, that even if there is a backlog, we have our EADs and APs, and we can legally live in the United States, work in the United States, the country, come back inside without having to worry about anything. That gave us the peace of mind to actually pursue this opportunity very seriously.
Got it. And so once you had initial research of, okay, this program is going to be a possible option for us, and now that there's that additional benefit of the concurrent filing, what was your kind of first step? What did you start to do in terms of researching potential immigration attorneys to help through the process, and also, beginning to look at potential investment options as well?
Makes sense.
Yeah. So I think we didn't start with attorneys at all. We actually started with projects.
Okay.
We started looking around our network and was associated with this industry, because we hadn't heard of many people actually taking this route.
Okay.
Our connections, we were first introduced to one of the projects that we first saw. And then through the process, when we got introduced to different attorneys.
And then to start with, I guess, understanding what EB-5 entails, creating 10 jobs, whose responsibility is that defines the kind of project you want to invest in. Now, moving on, when we realize that there are different types of project, we wanted to reduce our risk as much as possible. That's why we decided one of our criteria will be to have a rural project. Now, once we started narrowing down our search in the rural project, we came across different kinds of projects, multifam, senior living, or I would say just mixed use, or even like resort kind of projects.
Yep. Before we jump into the specific types of projects, tell us a little bit about rural. Why were you so focused on picking a rural project versus, a non-rural or urban project?
Right. And I guess that's one of the major key. Understanding what EB-5 program is all about, that's where you will get the answer. The 10,000 visas that's been allotted for EB-5 on a yearly basis, 20% of those are reserved for rural category. In order for us to reduce the risk and increase our chances for permanent residency, we wanted to make sure that we can tap into that 20%. And that's why the major reason behind choosing a rural program was getting that reserved category benefit. Hope that answers your question.
Oh yeah, yep. And also, investors in rural projects also get the faster priority processing too. So not only are you getting more available visas that help you kind of lower that risk of a future backlog, but you also get priority processing, which means you're getting access to that visa sooner, which means you're getting the green card in your hand faster. And we've seen that over the last few years since the RIA. We've really seen that come to fruition. It was unclear several years ago what priority processing really meant. And now it's been several years, and we're seeing approvals in our rural projects in 12 to 18 months, some less than 12 months even. So it really is a lot faster than it has been historically. But on the project side, so first, you understood the difference between rural and urban, and made a decision primarily on rural. What were some of the other kind of diligence criteria when you started to look at different rural projects that were open, available for investment?
Makes sense. Yeah. I guess the 800K amount is definitely a lot when it comes to your investing into any construction related project. From engineering background, I have a civil, I am kind of close to that industry, going not so well. So that amount of, we wanted to have an clear-cut exit strategy.
Yep.
Now, there are different kind of projects, and the exit strategy are dependent on the kind of project you are going to choose. Whether if it's like based on the amount of houses or amount of flats or condos sold. For me personally, that's a function of external factors, macro factors, versus if the project is more of based on, hey, you know what, there is a refinance program by government. Maybe there is a loan category. So I'll come to equity versus loan aspect, where it's a debt structure that gives us more confidence with that kind of money repayment.
Yeah, and I'll say a couple of things. So we did see a project rural, which was on the tourism recreation side. So there was a project we even visited, which was mixed use. So you would have a hotel, you would have condos, you would have a shopping mall.
Yep.
We found that a little more risky for us because we didn't know where it was going to lead us to. But then we also saw more like senior care facilities, etc., which was also an interesting industry to be part of. But I think what gave us confidence with Twin Lakes, which is what we ended up investing in, was even though the financial success of the project is based on the number of homes sold, it is a section of people that are not relying on getting a loan, but because it's a 55 plus community, most of the transactions are completely cash and people are able to buy it on the spot. Also, we wanted to see the location is extremely important because who's going to be interested based on where this particular project is based. And Twin Lakes' proximity to Atlanta as a city, it's about, I think, an hour and a half away from the airport, made it super lucrative as well.
And focusing on which kind of projects you want to go for, the criterias we had besides rural strategy was something that would give us confidence of creating 10 jobs.
Right.
Because that is one of the major concerns for USCIS or for the government to give you that green card, because that the project is helping US economy. We had seen projects from 0 to 10 jobs completed, and it was a clear-cut, obvious choice that you would choose a project where there have been these requirement jobs are already been created. So that is something that gave us more confidence with Twin Lakes.
Yep.
Again, understanding the nitty-gritties of how does that matter, because our question was, if we are putting money right now, does that mean the 10 jobs have to be created afterwards? Or does that even count the previous 10 jobs created? We needed to get some clarity on that.
Right.
And that's where the immigration folks, as well as regional center folks, Sam and Mike, have been very helpful to give all the information very transparently and educate ourselves. That helps us to take the decision smoothly as well as with a lot of peace.
And how, on that question of job creation, how did that kind of factor compare across some of the other rural projects that you looked at? Obviously, some projects are earlier on and they don't have a lot of construction happening. Others are more advanced. So, how did that factor kind of differ, across the 5, 6, 7 projects that you considered?
I think all the projects that we saw have 10 jobs created already for our slot had we gone with it. So in any of those projects, we would have been taking that risk of putting our money in before those jobs got created for us. So that's why Twin Lakes was extremely lucrative for us, because for our fund, our slot, the 10 jobs were already created at that point of investment.
Got it. Okay, so in terms of shifting away from the project for a minute, immigration attorneys. Tell us a little bit about that source of funds process. Now that you've gone through it, documents have been mailed, everything's finished. How long was that process? How time intensive? And tell us a little bit of immigration. Did you interview three, and why did you end up picking the one that you did?
Makes sense. Yeah, there are several stakeholders involved in the EB-5 process, right? You, the regional center, as well as the lawyers. The immigration attorney are the major key player in the entire process because they are more of on your team and they want the best for you. They want to make sure that the source of fund is clean, you are not getting RFEs, you're not going through other, I would say, questions after submitting all the documents. So for us as well, choosing the right immigration attorney was very crucial for us. Now, 5 of them, Mitch, Wexler, and Nam were in fact suggested by mentors. And when we had a conversation, very much to work with them, years of experience. Mitch has seen everything and anything under the sun with respect to EB-5, experience 40 years. Second thing, the Fragment brand, we have been familiar with it, and I would say the brand itself has a lot of credibility to work with. Now, there were cheaper options, there were more expensive options, there were, I would say, more experienced folks, the less experienced folks. But when you have that conversation with attorneys, the way they are answering your questions can help you to do a good judgment call. For us, it was more from we need to learn, we need to understand, so we'll have a lot of questions asked. If someone, be it regional center or attorney, is not answering those questions, personally wouldn't be going in that direction. That did not happen with Mitch and Fragment team. So that was something important for us.
Yeah, and also for source of funds, we were very satisfied with Fragment due diligence. For us, it took us almost 8 to 9 months to complete our source of funds. It's time consuming, and I like to tell people to factor in that time as well when you are planning an EB-5 investment plan for it, because it is going to take time. Depending on where you get your funds from, etc., there will be some digging required, and it's extremely important to be thorough with it. CIS is going to look at those documents very thoroughly. So as much as even in the process, hindsight, maybe we would have started preparing for source of funds even earlier on in the process of exploring the projects, had we known the extent to which we would have to pull together the documentation as well.
Got it. And you brought some funds from overseas. So how did that kind of add to the complexity and nuances of going through that process?
Yeah, so one of the things for us was to make sure we keep in mind the laws of the source country as well as the destination country for those funds. There could be tax implications, etc., that you need to manage. You would need to hire the right people on both ends of the transaction to make sure all loose ends are tied.
Yep.
And to ensure every transaction is properly documented. There are definitely challenges when you are bringing funds from overseas, because USCIS would require additional documentation for those funds, just because every country works differently and the meaning of certain documents is different within the US, which is why additional information to justify where you're actually getting it from. So that was definitely an additional step as well.
And logistically speaking, creating a new bank account was a great idea for us to keep this separate from our day-to-day from perspective, or even from taxation perspective in the United States. Other thing was the wire fees when you're sending this big amount of money can add more to your entire transaction. Thinking in that direction. On the other end, what Ayushi mentioned about the source from India, especially, laws are changing. Now the new law says that you have to pay out of money as GST. So all those extra implications of moving with that kind of big chunk of rupees or yen or any other currency.
How was the invested? You filed your applications in February, so a few months back. What's happened since then?
So Valentine, that day, I've been making sure that we check our email ID, we make our form delivery section. We want to make sure that we get all the communication from their end, although your immigration officer is helping you, but you want to be on top of those things. Second thing is, once we receive the receipt that they have received the application, we want to make sure that we upload that particular receipt number in our USCIS, my USCIS account, so that it's digitally automatically tracked. Next thing is, we can be panicking, we can be anxious about when is this going to happen. Every day you keep checking the website. That can be, I would say, like exhausting. But as I was telling, some things which are not in our hands, we have to play that game. But when the USCIS sends you any documentation, make sure that you follow through. There is a lag between document being sent to you versus document being sent to immigration. So this happened with us. There are certain steps. One is biometric. So that step, the biometric for some invest automatically, and then if you haven't received the document, you might miss. We were fortunate in that document, maybe your actual appointment, and we were, be it from job perspective or scheduling other things. So that's number one. When biometric appointment happens, your employment and advance parole. So it can go from anywhere between 60 days to 20 days. We were fortunate enough to get it in 2.5, and the advance parole came in around 60, I would say 90 days, 3 months of waiting period.
Got it. And so now that you have those in hand and you've got complete employment and travel flexibility, how do you plan to, what, I guess first question, how does it feel to have that burden lifted from your shoulders? And then two, what plans or things are you kind of making for later in 2024 that, that's kind of addressed?
Yeah, I can start. I think it definitely lifts a lot of weight off your shoulders because you're not limited to one employer. There is a sense of freedom that also kicks in because now it feels like the world is your oyster because you have so many opportunities open. So it's definitely very, very, very exciting. Having filed EB-5 while being in the US definitely has its advantages because with the EAD and the AP, there is no limitations per se. The only thing you're waiting for is your conditional green card, pretty much.
Right.
And now we have the freedom to choose from different opportunities for our lives as well, in terms of exploring different opportunities, exploring different investments, or even academic opportunities that we might want to pursue without having to worry about what we would do with our H1s or have to go back on a student visa or extreme step for that matter.
Right. I guess the opportunities are now open much more than that would have been on H1B or EB3 green card track. So that is something crucial for our own personal development, as well as the travel aspect of it. Travel is not defined by your visa appointment is a big plus
Correct.
for us.
And I think one more thing is, in current economy, we are happening across all the industries pretty much. And having the EAD and the AP still gives us a lot of freedom, knowing that we wouldn't have to necessarily depart the country if something as well. So we have satisfaction to say we can time to deal with it, and we would have more options.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. All right, so shift gears a little bit and chat about a little bit earlier, but on the non kind of source of funds side of the, obviously you've got the project, the investment itself, and then you've got the regional center. So maybe first let's talk a little regional center. So how was your experience, interacting with a number of different regions over the last year, and the key difference and that you really picked up on you when you were between versus another?
I can start. So we went and spoke to more than 6 or 7 regional centers in total. The biggest difference we saw was, number one, was transparency. With EB-5AN, all the documentation was black and white. Every number or every metric that we needed was provided. I think the response rate is very high and very quick. Like, the turnaround times are very low, so we can get our questions answered very quickly. The second thing was that EB-5AN has adopted more of an educational approach. The EB-5 process in general is not very widely known, at least in the community that we come from. And so going through that educational process, maybe even taking some of the pointers that we learned through EB-5AN and going and asking different regional centers was very helpful for us to gather our information and do our due diligence in the process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we have been very grateful that we came across EB-5AN through our own research. So the standard, the benchmark that you guys have put it in the industry is definitely incredible, I would say, applause worthy, because that gives us a lot of confidence dealing with people, number one. And second thing is, if you have that trust, then you are not worrying about what's going to happen with your money either. Now, EB-5AN, the founders, Sam and Mike, they have a great educational background, number one. They have a great professional experience. That counts a lot. And third thing is, the metrics or the important information key pieces that EB-5AN focuses on was not seen in other regional centers. That was one of the key differentiator among like EB-5AN and other regional centers. So I can go and keep going with all the great things that you guys have been doing and you're planning to do. But I guess EB-5AN, the 6 or 8 months of conversation or the exposure that we got was more than enough for us to take a pause and just go ahead with EB-5AN.
Also, the ongoing information. So even as you're doing your due diligence, if you are subscribed to the EB-5AN emails, you get updated on what are the trends, what's changing, even the hike in fee that happened very recently. The first we heard of it was through an email that your team had sent out. So even knowing what's going on in the industry, even if you are talking to other regional centers, it helps you ask the right questions so you can get all the information that you need to make an informed.
Absolutely. Your application has gone or you have received EAD or AP, I didn't see EB-5AN going or missing out of the picture. They are still in the picture. They're still there to help you, give you information. And as Ayushi mentioned, through the newsletter, we are up to date with all the new policies and regulations. And that information, the or even the conditional or unconditional green card processing from the beginning, so that there are no surprises that we are facing here down the road or so.
And in terms of the different regional centers, you connected with 6, 7, 8 of them. How was the speaking with more salespeople and speak with any of the principals at any of the other regional centers, and how was that kind of ability to company principals at EB-5AN with the experience talking with the representatives at some of the other regional centers?
So I can talk about one where we did talk about the principals at that particular regional center. We are both very data-driven people. Relationships are extremely important, trust, but in our opinion, with regional centers, we did get the information, but the information was told in a rather, so it made to get to the answers that we need. EB-5AN, it was a very simple conversation. Every question was answered with as much data, which helped us gather the information. We actually have a lot of documentation that we put in as well. Easy and quick as a discussion that we needed to move to the next step, whatever it may have been at that point.
And then incentive model in any business is something that I like to figure out. For salespeople or even for the front gatekeepers, their incentive is to get action done. But when we have access to principals or the founding team of any regional center, the conversation is at a different level. You guys are focusing on adding value to the investor by educating them, and not just focus on this and move on to the next. So the difference between transactional conversations versus more of transformational conversations, EB-5AN did a great job. Mike and you did a great job in terms of building those relationships, not in terms of short-term, quick, those relationships from the long-term perspective.
That's really helpful. The project that you visit projects in person, which is great. Tell us a little bit about kind of how those visits varied across projects, and what were some red flags or things that just gave you pause on some of the projects that you saw in person.
I would say if you are evaluating a project, do go visit it. I would actually highly recommend it.
Yes, you should definitely invest that money and time before putting your bigger chunk of money in the project.
We did have some experiences where we wanted to go see for ourselves truly what the progress on a project was, instead of just going by what somebody from a regional center was telling us, because incentives could differ in many situations. We actually took multiple trips, including multiple trips to the Twin Lakes project throughout our journey of evaluating EB-5, because on ground, you actually get to see what's happening. You can have conversations just generically with people in that area, maybe visit a gas station or whatever. That's what we did, to ask information about what was going on. Most of the projects that we visited were greenfield stage, which would, in our opinion, be more risky as compared to something that was either under construction or you could see progress. The beauty of Twin Lakes is because it's not a building per se being constructed and it's houses, it's more incremental. And looking at Twin Lakes. We visited, I think, almost every or so. Under construction was now built and even inhabited in many cases, which gave us satisfaction that the progress, the was heading towards
right.
completion.
And it's not just about the project pictures on your deck or on the presentation. It's about what's happening in the surroundings, right? Projects on the West Coast, and the project looked great, but the surroundings, the location of that project may not be the best in our investment. Now, that might differ from person to person, but for us, it was important to understand the macro impact this particular project or any particular project. There might be a situation where, because of the regulations and rules in that particular location, the project get affected. So you might want to, if you are in United States and if you're in person, I would highly encourage. Now, people who are not in United States or who are trusting the broker or trusting the salesperson or even trusting the principal, they can opt for maybe Google Earth or just calling the nearby restaurants or locations to get that information. The bottom line I want to make sure to tell people, to educate them, is like, you should not just trust the regional center and the salespeople. You should do your own due diligence. And information from those points, from those efforts, can help you to ask right, I would say, more appropriate questions, more in-depth questions to salespeople or regional center.
And one thing you mentioned there was interactions with brokers. So I remember you mentioned that you were discussing potential projects with one or two brokers, and tell us a little bit about that experience and kind of why you decided, at the end of the day, like not really something that you wanted to have in place.
Makes sense. I would say it's a very personal choice. Some people want to have that relational salesperson in between. We saw cloud broker system with the major difference was the have vested interest in your long-term success. They have a short-term interest because the entire structure is put it that way. Now, is it wrong? Is it right? I don't want to comment on that. But personally, that defines a lot of information processing from their end. That defines what kind of information they want to give, they want to keep at their end. That's what kind of differentiating between no broker system and broker system. I would say the experience perspective, the brokers can go from one project to another project, but you're going to get stuck with that particular project. So be careful about what kind of with, and able to principals, or if you are able to talk to the actual regional center reps, I would highly recommend to do that.
Yeah, and I think one of the pieces of it is we were willing to invest the time to understand the entire EB-5 process end to end. With different people, the constraints could be very different, where the broker could be helpful in terms of educating yourself or gathering certain pieces of information. For us, because we studied the whole system and the process really well, we didn't feel the need to have an additional middleman to help us out. And we were fortunate that we reached out to EB-5AN directly in the first place, the first time we did as well. So it was a no-brainer for us to just approach it directly instead of going through another person.
We could see through their screens because we know more information in some cases than these brokers. Our questions were smarter than the information that they were trying to give us. So that is definitely helpful. One of the, like, what advice would you give to those interested in EB-5 process? I guess doing your own due diligence, not about the project or not just about the regional center, about the EB-5 and process itself will help you to clarify a lot of doubts questions and your dependence on in the information given by someone else. So I feel ask people who you know about their opinions, but ask strangers the facts, the factual questions. So that way you can educate yourself more effectively.
Got it. So during that kind of 6 to 10 month period where you were evaluating projects, you were visiting different projects in person, at the end of that time, what are the kind of 4 or 5 main points that made you most comfortable with Twin Lakes, that you decided, okay, this is the project that we want to invest in, and we're comfortable here, and we can see the success of the project? What were those kind of 4 or 5 things that just really crystallized that decision about the Twin Lakes?
So I can give a couple. One was definitely because we're part of the loan fund, that the loan repayment guarantee was great. That was definitely a pivotal point in our decision as well.
Right. And even for the loan repayment guarantee, the financials were very crystal clear. The transparency was maintained by both regional center as well as Coulter as a development group, because we had a lot of questions about repayment guarantee, and they were satisfied not just with the emails but with the attachments of financials, as well as you mentioned about the balance sheets and whatnot. So that gave us a lot of confidence. So that's one, definitely the repayment guarantee.
And also the progress of the project that we saw over that period of 6 to 10 months showed us that the project was coming to fruition pretty quickly. It was, as we saw people living there, using the amenities, etc. So that was definitely a big part of our decision.
Second, adding to that, like, it's not just houses being built, houses being sold. So that newsletter with the updates that, you know what, this month we sold more 13, 14, 15 houses. So that gave us more confidence that, it's not just being built, but it's also being disposed of, which helps to build good financials.
And then the third point was that the jobs were already created by the time we invested, which gave us the confidence in the project itself, knowing, or well, at least minimizing the risk with the immigration process per se.
Makes sense, yeah. Those were 3 main factors, I would say, that help us to have peace going ahead with Georgia.
And I know obviously the timing of your investment with the recent lawsuit with respect to the ad risk period. So maybe tell us a little bit about that, and kind of how that has affected your thinking, and how that could have, that lawsuit's investors joining rural projects today, they have to consider how the outcome of that lawsuit could affect their investment, because any change will likely be retroactive. So yeah, how do you kind of think about that aspect?
Yeah, makes sense. I guess coming back to our point, understanding the EB-5 process on your own, but also getting up-to-date information, maybe registering, subscribing to EB5AN newsletter, even though you are in like 0th step, or even though you are like almost there, you're done with your SRF, access to information will definitely help you to take the right decision. Second thing, the retroactive and whatnot, you have to be prepared for both the cases, or I would say all the cases, and plan accordingly. So that would something that people need to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. Deciding the project is a big step, but that's not the only step, in my opinion. It's very important to understand the financial commitments, that it's not just the 800K. There are additional components to it that you need to be aware about, which is where the fee hike actually came into the picture. We were fortunate enough to avoid it because we actually invested prior to the fee hike. But when it does come to later steps in our process, we will have to pay whatever the new fee structure is. Even the retroactive of the at-risk period, the lawsuit that you're referring to, we are fully aware that it may affect us too. However, it's important to be prepared, and it's important to know what situations or what constraints you have before going into this, because as Kaushal said, it's an ever-changing industry. It's an ever-changing, I mean, the rules can also be ever-changing as things change with the government, etc. So it's just really important to educate yourself, and even after the investment is done, it's really important to stay on top of what's changed.
I always like to emphasize is just from a project research and diligence perspective is just to simplify, look at the underlying business success of the project. Just if the project itself is successful economically and makes a, that's pretty much the potential issue, funds being issue, and for repayment when it makes a profit, then there should be enough money to timely revive investor funds as well. So kind of applying that lens on Twin Lakes, what kind of gave you confidence this project should continue to be successful during the time my funds are in the project?
Right. We came in the number of houses, I would say. The expected house built number of houses is 1,300 and 600 or 700, right? This gives you confidence. I mentioned earlier the continuous progression, but the most important document that is something that can help you to get more confidence and understanding. As you said, the operational profitability of the business is clear to all. So if that's happening in any project, to be honest, you would be on a safer position. You would be on a safer side.
Also, one of the things that had suggested to us in our initial stage, Mike and team stages, was to visit the Twin Lakes project, not as an investor, but as a potential buyer of one of the homes to get some unbiased information on the project. So we also got our facts and figures from there to understand how many homes were being sold. When we first visited the project, there was actually a wait list for, because they had not opened certain development as well. Interest was high in how what possibly could be the outcome of once it's fully developed as well.
Got it. Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Back to a little bit. Working with the EB-5AN, how was access to documents, records, those types of things?
Mm-hmm. I guess the most important part of communication is accountability. I mean that response time, the turnaround time has to be, that's my expectation. That expectations. Whenever we ask any questions, Sam or Mike was willing to get on a quick call. I know they are working with a lot of investors, but they were gracious enough to have one-on-one communication. So we are not going through back and forth email chains, trying to schedule a time and whatnot. So the information gathering process was very quick. Secondly, EB-5AN has done a great job in terms of getting testimonies, getting up-to-date information about regulations and policies, or even like expanding their portfolio in different types of projects. That itself is a lot of, I would say, peacemaking situation. Why? Because it's not their last projects, it's just the beginning. So we know that EB-5AN is going to be there for the long term, not just for short term. And the conversations in terms of, I would say, document exchanging or PPM or subscription booklet, if I have any questions, I can just like write a quick email. I'm sure, and I was sure that I'll get an answer within 24 hours. And if not, that's not happening, either I'll get a response that, hey, you know what, we'll give you the answer by XYZ date. So that accountability of communication was very important for me, and that's what I experienced with EB5.
And I think in addition was whatever information or document, and also space. I think one of the best parts was once the information was provided, there wasn't a clock ticking for us to make a decision. There was enough space given to us to do our own due diligence, to think it through before we came back. So we really appreciate nobody continuously pressurizing us or hammering us, saying, what have you decided next? Do you want to do this? Do you not want to? Definitely vision to invest this important us to take our own time and space to decide where we ultimately want to invest.
To summarize, like EB5AN gave us enough to make the final decision, and that was something very appreciative of you guys.
One of the things you mentioned there was testimonials, and obviously we're very grateful to have you with us today to share your opinions and your experience. But how was that helpful? I know on our website we've got a number of testimonials from prior investors, but yeah, how important or how much of that did you review, and how was that helpful in terms of helping to build out the questions that you asked going through the process yourselves?
Right.
So I think, as I mentioned earlier, there aren't many people around us who've gone through the EB5 process. So sometimes it can feel like a very lonely world, and the only people you could talk to are either the regional centers or the attorneys themselves,
or the brokers,
right? It's important to learn from somebody else's experience, which you can't find very easily out there. We the testimonial, understand what everybody's experience is different, and it actually helps questions that we need different projects or different regional centers.
Yeah, I guess 2-3 things I would say is, first is proof of concept, that it does work, right? And it does work with EB5AN. Second, you might have seen strangers, but if the person is from a similar community or similar experience, you can relate more to that experience than someone telling you you should do this, that. It acts better, I would say, than a broker, because the incentive alignment is very different, but a very unbiased, I would say, information is very, very crucial. I was fortunate to get a couple of them before money in our project, and that those even one-on-one more confidence in going in conversations, definitely going in this direction.
And also, not exactly testimonial, but EB5AN does host events in different cities. I had a chance to attend one right after we invested, in fact, but I think that's also a really good opportunity to come meet existing investors and ask questions on how they did their due diligence, etc., to really learn from other people's experience as well.
And the challenges, the information arbitrage or lack of, I would say, fear of unknown that we faced during this process, we want to make sure that throughout our experience, if we can help somebody to get their questions answered, or if someone can start thinking a little bit different after listening to our testimonial, we'll be more than happy to be in that position.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So kind of very, very high level, having just gone through the process, 10 months later, application filed, EAD, approval, AP in hand. What's kind of the high level advice that you would have for, other H-1B investors already in the US who are, maybe they've heard of it and they're seriously thinking about doing EB5? What are some of the kind of high level pieces of advice that you would share with people in that situation?
I think top advice is ask a lot of questions, ask everything under the sun. you are the investor and the regional center or the project or the attorney, they're all there to help you, and they should provide the information that you need to make your decision. So no question's a bad question, definitely ask it. Second point that Kaushal also made is understand the EB-5 process for yourself. So you're very clear on what each step would mean and everything. You can make the process very predictable for yourself.
Yeah, makes sense. And understand the timeline of the entire process. As you said, H1B, you just have 6 years. And if you start at the 5th year of the H1B, the EB5 process can take a little bit more than a year. So focus on best case scenario and worst case scenario and plan it accordingly. The bottom line is do consider this option, because coming from our background, we were not even considering this option until we actually sat down and asked ourselves the question, why not? Because this investment is not money gone. It's more of like treat it as an investment, zero interest rate investment, put it that way for 5 years, and then the benefits that you can reap of this particular investment project is going to help you in the long term. So do consider this option and educate yourself, talk to multiple regional centers, and then that way it's very easy to define what works with you, what doesn't work with you. And for us, it was a straightforward choice to go ahead with EB5AN. But before that, even if we don't do that, we wouldn't have been so confident about going with EB5AN. So a quick anecdote, the first project that we saw for EB5 projects or EB5 investment program was Georgia Twin Lakes. But we took a step back and decided, hey, you know what? We're going to do a little bit of shopping. We're going to see what's there. We're going to get more experiences, learn through it. And then the choice was very easy to make to go ahead with EB5.
Got it. Got it. Well, thank you guys for taking the time today to share your experience. We really appreciate it. And I'm glad that you got a chance to visit the project several times. And yeah, everything's gone smoothly so far on the immigration side. And yeah, we are very excited for you.
Thank you. Thanks
so
a lot
much.
for you guys and your team.
Absolutely.
For constant support throughout the process.